looks like everybody is here, so let's begin. Hello and welcome to the Multi-Copter Warehouse webinar series. There are just a few items to go over before we begin. Everyone in the audience will be muted. If you have any questions, please write them in the question queue or chat, and we will be sure to answer them during the Q&A portion at the end. Today's webinar overviews a comprehensive guide to mastering drone surveys, field planning, equipment prep, and data processing. So without further ado, please welcome our Enterprise Sales Specialist for Survey and Mapping, Dan McGreevy.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan McGreevy and I'm a Enterprise Sales Specialist here at Multi-Copter Warehouse. I'm in our Austin office and we'll go ahead and jump right in. Thanks for joining us. Just a quick little blurb about me. I have 20 years plus in aviation business. I was in the private aviation software world, aircraft sales, and had some safety and operations type jobs over the years. I have 4 years as a commercial construction project manager, building projects here in Austin for commercial businesses. Active 107 pilot. I have about a year of solid field experience working full time doing photogrammetry and LiDAR missions flown all over the world, and all over the USA mostly. But yeah, my contact information is here, and we'll go ahead and get started. If you don't know about Multi-Copter Warehouse, basically we offer and empower our clients to get the equipment they need, help you, figure out your drone programs, recommend equipment, train, support, and provide service. Try to give you guys the best experience in the industry. Today's agenda. Today's agenda is a little bit of a mixed topics, condensed. Trying to do this in 30 minutes. I wanted to bring some topics about being, life in the field. Maybe some of you already obviously are in the field or want to be in the field more, or you're scaling a drone program. I want to go over, kind of some of the safety and equipment and the best practices that I learned in my experience flying professionally for large, mostly a lot of mining and aggregate companies, large sites, also landfills. Cover kind of how to prepare for a site job the day before or the day of, and also talk about risk assessments and avoidance while you're out and about in the field. So here's a couple photos. In my experience in the field, most of the work I was doing was photogrammetry for some really large mines, and that's me on the top of a hill, and on the right is basically stockpiles that we were measuring. Photogrammetry with various drones. I was not married to one particular drone, and I'm going to kind of stay agnostic as far as naming products. We support a lot of different product lines. Just check out our website. On the left here, you can see kind of a stockpile measurement from a mission. That's me sitting in the middle of a landfill on top doing a scan, and again, another kind of just a sample photo of a typical stockpile measurement job. Here is an ortho of a 1,200 acre mine. As you can see, all these piles down here, a lot of data to manage, a lot of processing work was involved in those kind of jobs, but it was a really cool experience. And on the topic of landfills or topos, this is just kind of a sample map of a site in Texas that I did. We call them like a cut fill. This is actually a sand manufacturing gravel mine. As far as photogrammetry, in the sense of mining, typically you have a lot of different products with different densities and whatnot, and we won't get too deep into that, but just give you a little background. So as far as working in the field and your equipment, obviously, hopefully you have your 107 or you're working on it. I do want to bring up OSHA 10 and 30, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's common in construction to have an OSHA 10 card. It's often required in some states. It's a lot easier to get that than your 107. And then there's an OSHA 30 card as well. That's a Department of Labor thing. And then MSHA training is actually, I won't get into that too much, but if you are going to work on some of these sites, you may be required. If you want to drive your truck around on a mine, you need to be MSHA certified. So obviously driver's license. I do want to recommend especially when you're going in. There's a lot of places in Texas we don't have internet. I'm based in Texas, and every state has places with no internet. So bringing print copies of things is really helpful. You know, being prepared to work offline is huge. Most of these sites, if you have good cell service, it's usually not that great. So I want to kind of give some tips on working offline. Um, Backup batteries and some other equipment things I'll show you here in a minute, but also being proactive about your route planning and site survey, you know, really kind of your pre-flight stuff. Airspace unlocking, for example. You know, I've had jobs where you know, having a waiver is one thing, but, you know, if I have to go in and apply for a flight, you know, I've had to jobs where it took a week to get approval, you know, you know, if you're 107, you know how that works, but I definitely wanted to bring some of that stuff up. So yeah, these are the 10 and 30 OSHA cards. You know, basically, it's just, I think it's a good credential. I think you might start to see it more in the drone industry. Some of you may already have them, but I highly recommend it. It's a great thing to have in your tool belt also. I do want to bring up, you know, maybe this is obvious for some of you, but if you're expanding your drone programs or trying to get an idea of like investments and what kind of stuff you need, you know, in my world, you know, I wasn't allowed on a site without four-wheel drive and a truck with all my gear. You know, safety beacons, safety lights. Even if most surveyors carry all this stuff, safety cones, flags. You know, I even carried emergency fuel. We get stuck a lot. Have tow straps. Having backup batteries are really important too, or a tire inflation kit. Some of this may be obvious, but I found in many instances, you know, these were valuable items. The first thing I want to bring up too is if your vehicle, most of you probably have some sort of, nowadays modern trucks have power outlets, but there's no way they can handle, let's just say, for example, the DJI 350 battery, if you're familiar with those batteries. Um, you need a huge inverter in your truck, and you probably need to spend some money on it. And so I would definitely recommend having an interior inverter, usually I like it under the passenger seat, and make sure that that's going to power your gadgets. Now, your drone batteries and keep them in an air-conditioned cab. That gasless battery generator, which is essentially a portable battery, I sometimes had that charging and then would plug controllers and smaller drones into that. So it's running off that. And the inverter is charging my portable batteries, but also charging my big batteries too. So electricity management's huge out there. PPE is fairly obvious. You should always have your standard PPE. CB radio, I know it sounds cheesy, but from a safety standpoint, most mines, a lot of construction sites, anything with trucks that have payloads, CB radios are actually pretty common. It's a great safety backup thing to have. You could probably get one for under $100, I'd imagine. I do recommend a backup tripod if you're doing any sort of work that requires a tripod. I recommend having a second one. They get beat up, they get bent. And then the backup hotspot, if you know, we all rely on our phone hotspots, and those are great, but they're also bombarded with other stuff that's going on. And I always had a secondary hotspot with not the same provider, because some places you have great AT&T service, and then you have terrible T-Mobile or vice versa. So having a dedicated hotspot, especially when you're on the road uploading files, you know, even the hotel internet these days. If you've got a couple gigabytes of files you're trying to upload into a cloud, it might take all night or not even happen. So I recommend a good hotspot as a backup. The laptop mount, you know, this is more of a nice to have, but if you are spending enough time in the field, I recommend having that. Trying to do your work, when you're sitting there processing, you need, you know, a nice workstation. I would recommend you can get something for like $300, depending on your vehicle. Survey paint and tape, fairly obviously. I like this red duct tape, especially for sites I didn't want to trash with when I had flying over certain ground points and whatnot. Memory cards, just a quick note, depending on your gear, a lot of people like to improvise. You know, you definitely want to make sure to buy the right size card, and I put a red X next to these adapter cards. I've had work that just didn't turn out because I took a mini card and I stuck it into, let's just say, for example, well, I had a proprietary camera that I had to have this bigger card. You can't use these. So just try not to get too crazy. Always buy the good memory card that matches the specs. This stuff's obvious, but a first aid kit, shovel, toe straps, lens wipes for your drone lenses and whatnot. Again, most of this is just the kind of thing where if you get stuck out in the field, you're going to feel pretty mad at yourself that you didn't have these things. I highly recommend sandbags for tripods or just other things when you're working out in the elements. Another thing that we should really take seriously that I'm not sure, I started to learn the longer I was in the field was having a good enough fire extinguisher that might actually be able to put out, a battery fire. They have lithium iron battery fire blankets that you can purchase. And also you may want to research, I'm not going to recommend any specific fire extinguishers. You can go kind of crazy with buying a really fancy one, but I brought sand in here because sand and water are actually a great way to put out battery fires from what I've researched. But it's something you need to keep in mind that I've seen several drones that crashed and they caught on fire when they hit the ground. So canned air, again, kind of obvious, but if you are out doing work, do not put your gear away, dirty. And, you may have DJI or care programs and things like that, but just all the equipment really needs to be put away clean. It's going to get dirty. It's going to get wet. I can't emphasize enough taking good care of that equipment so you're not having to worry about, incidents. This one, I recently read that a drone actually started a significant forest fire. And, part of this is about being proactive here. You are licensed, you're responsible for that flight. You may be on a client site, but you may want to see like, man, I'm flying over a bunch of forests. What happens if I go down? Who am I going to call? How am I going to handle that if that happens? Besides, dialing 911. Collision avoidance, I think, is another big thing that just goes into, pre-flight planning. This is a sample of a flight I did in Florida. This crane was not up when I got there, I don't think, because I couldn't see it. But I also didn't pre-fly the site. So I recommend you always pre-fly the site that you're mapping that area that day, see what's around. Luckily, I didn't hit this thing, but, things can change quickly. So always kind of pre-fly. On the mission day, in Texas, which was a lot of the work that I did, early morning's the best, especially with the weather. I would always try to get to a site by sunrise, before sunrise, get my things set up and kind of survey the scene, maybe drive the site, get everything going and take off about 30 minutes after the sun comes out. Then take lots of photos. Photos are a great way to know where you were on bigger sites and actually see where they're geo-stamped. It logs things for you. There's, if things happen on that job, you have a historical record. You can never really take too many photos on any job. When you do get to the site, always check in if you need to, and some larger, especially maybe oil and gas or some of the bigger enterprise type operations are going to make you watch safety videos. They're going to make sure you have all your PPE in order. You don't want to show up and find out you can't go on site because you don't have steel-toed boots. So, do your homework. Let's see, I already kind of mentioned just taking photos, especially with base stations and ground targets. Always take a picture of those so you can kind of reference them on a map. And this is repetitive as well, but, pre-fly, I have a little mini drone that I actually used to use, and I would just pop it up 300 or 400 feet, kind of make sure there's nothing crazy up there that I might hit once the mission gets going. That way I don't have to stop my mission and land and deal with it and rebuild it. And same thing if you're making KMLs. It's easy to make a KML on Google Earth, and what you see on there is not actually what that looks like anymore. So it's really easy to miss areas. So you kind of want to get in there, load your controller, make sure the map matches it, maybe drive that area, make sure, I used to always overfly a job. Obviously be careful with that because overflying means overflying into someone else's property, and there's all kinds of neighboring businesses that might take a threat, or it could just create more problems for you. So let's see here. So one thing I wanted to bring up is like to be prepared that day of a flight. You really want to have everything ready. And for me, it was usually in a hotel room or at my house on a Sunday. I'd make my KMLs, I'd put them in the controller, I'd turn on the controller, I'd upload, make sure all the firmware is uploaded, maybe fly the drone for a while. If it hasn't been flown in a week or two. But just do all the firmware updates if you need to. I'm not saying you always have to do your firmware updates. That can be controversial for some people, but make sure everything's calibrated. You just don't want to show up and have a short window. You end up messing around for 2 hours, and then before you know it, it starts raining, and then you're going to have to come back the next day. So do your homework the night before. Um, just on this 107, if you are a 107 licensed operator, that you are responsible, and more we're hearing about accidents and things, and more things are going to happen. So it's really something to take seriously as a pilot. I think when you're prepared for these missions and you have the right gear, your career, your reputation are on the line. I mean, you could even, we read in the news, people could end up in jail for some of these things, and you don't want to be responsible. So really pregame your job site, see what's around, what could be a risk, just crashes and collisions, or things that you might not have, that you get caught up in, basically. I had a trash fire on a landfill during a flight. Luckily, I knew how to get out of there, and I had to get out of there, and no big deal. I was on a job that had, later on there was basically there was a fatality on a site that we did, and they wanted all the historical data for that day, and that was pulled by authorities. So take it seriously that you may be surveying something, especially in construction. I mean, this is really important to get as much quality as you can, bump up your overlap, make sure your altitudes are good and that your conditions are good. On base stations, if you're using a base station, this was a kind of a typical setup for me. I actually had just a regular, it was a Trimble base station, and I had my sandbags, and also you can see on the right there, a lot of these equipment, the base stations, they have great batteries, maybe they have two, but I always had a portable battery powering that, because hours can go by and those things turn off and you have to refly your whole job. Yeah, so on the base stations, I mean, they could turn off when it gets too hot. I've heard of certain brands doing that. They fall over. All this stuff, when you're doing that kind of work, means reflying it. And also they can get stolen. I've heard of that happening. And they can also get run over by big trucks. So yeah, just keep in mind where that base station or your ground points are at, and kind of think about your surroundings. And so as far as batteries, I had a guy come in yesterday. His battery, it blew up inside the drone. It didn't blow up, but it expanded, and we couldn't get the battery out. It's hot in Texas. That can happen in flight. Don't leave your batteries in the truck. Take everything into your hotel room or your house. Keep them cool all times. And they do decline quickly. I've had batteries just sit for a couple days, and I go to fly, and they've lost 30% efficiency. So, again, it's just best practices. And as far as weather, winds, obviously, if you've flown enough, can make a huge difference in your job, your data quality. You start to get into 20 to 30 mile an hour winds, that's going to have a huge impact on your battery. You may just want to reschedule. Don't be afraid to reschedule. It's better to reschedule than sit around all day and hope that you can get a flight in, versus you're gonna have to come back anyway. So do your research. Weather, temperature, time of day. If you're in the mountains, density, altitude. I said this earlier, but 30 minutes prior to sunup is kind of, or I'm sorry, 30 minutes after the sun comes up is usually when I like to take off. That's just my preference. I like the windy.app for your wings. Great interface on the desktop, or download the app. A great way to kind of plan and organize your direction of flight and whatnot. Obviously, check your FAA sites, aviation weather sites, TFRs, do all of your, most of your 107 stuff. But another big one that I always struggled with was airspace management, getting airspace unlocked. For example, I have San Antonio here, Randolph Air Force Base is you have several Air Force bases. And not only calling them and getting approval is something that was required, and I had a waiver for some of these jobs, but you may just do a hey, how you doing? I'm doing a job over here. This may be the air traffic controller, and what do I need to do? Am I going to be able to fly? And you want to unlock that airspace if you need to go through, for example, like the DJI Fly Safe. You can log in, put in the address, draw your polygons. But if you're really cutting it close on some of these red areas and you start flying a mission, the drone's just going to stop and sit there. And I've had some issues where I basically had to kind of rebuild the mission. So you really want to be good about unlocking the airspace. You may even go there the day before and like test it out if you're worried, because that can really screw up your day. And there's a lot of options for apps and whatnot to do that. As far as on-site flying protocols, one thing I just like to bring up, may not be for everyone, but in some of the missions I was doing, if I could get the truck and my takeoff point from a higher spot, and kind of work from there, I just have more visibility, especially on like 500 plus acres. You'll have better connection with the controllers and battery swaps and whatnot, but always get permission and be conscious of your 400-foot rule, because there's a lot of caveats to that. Can't emphasize enough, just, buy the canned air, wipe off all your gear, really clean out the motors, blow the motors with dust. Dump your memory cards on the laptop and start checking the photos. Make sure that everything's in line. Put all your gear back and clean everything off and kind of do your post cleanup. When it comes to doing quality, I'm using a Pix4D example here. This is a quality report. So once I was kind of done with my work and get into the truck, start downloading photos, and you run through Pix4D, it'll generate these reports. You want it, and this is just Pix4D. There's obviously other software, but this is a quality report, and you usually want to look for all green check marks, not red stuff, and really kind of get that overview. This is another Pix4D report where you see that we have, geolocation errors and whatnot. Learn to read those reports, whatever software that is. Lamps and waivers, just really quickly, most of us, you're licensed, you know how all this stuff works to a certain degree, but if you're looking into doing waivers, we could do a whole webinar about that. We're not going to do that, but you do not need a waiver to fly a drone when you're complying with all the Part 107 regulations. However, if you're unable to comply with the regulations listed below as published, this is from the website, you can go there and look that you have to apply. If you've never seen a waiver, this is a waiver. This is a waiver that I had, and really I would print this on the site, print it out. There's usually instructions, there's usually phone numbers, there's requirements. You need to call, you need to, let us know 15 minutes in advance or 3 days in advance. You call that person, you introduce yourself, and then they may tell you to call that day, et cetera, et cetera. Just really read the fine print. There's usually a map that's provided as well, but that's just kind of a sample what a waiver looks like, if you have ever seen. Really quick, I know I'm running out of time here, but use cases, in this webinar, I just wanted to kind of more focus on construction, mining, and landfills, stockpiles, site progression, survey and mapping, asset management. Those are kind of the value adds that our equipment can bring to you guys, whether it's photogrammetry or LiDAR. This is actually a shout out to the DJI Terra platform. If you haven't messed with DJI Terra, it's a cloud-based application. Well, it's actually a software too, not just cloud. Sorry, you have to download something, but calculating different stockpiles is made fairly easily. We do have another webinar on this, and you can find it. I believe it's on our YouTube account. If not, let me know. I'll help you out. But basically, this just kind of covers some of the value add of what you can do in DJI Terra as far as modeling, creating models, digitizing your job sites and whatnot. And again, just some samples of survey and mapping results from Terra, and slope inspection as well, which is a neat feature to take advantage of. Kind of going to close this out because I've gone over my limit almost. I do want to recommend, photogrammetry is great, has its applications. This day and age with LiDAR, post-processing, and your overall time commitments can be laborious, so I do recommend LiDAR, I think, over photogrammetry. However, there's going to be applications that photogrammetry is actually going to be better than LiDAR. It really just depends on your mission. But I do think that LiDAR is becoming it's competitive. It's becoming more affordable depending on your rig. And so I would recommend, regardless of the make and model of the drone, if you're new to this, you may want to get a drone that can handle LiDAR payload and also a payload for photogrammetry. I think we're about it, and I will leave it at that and pass it back to Alex.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you for that very informative presentation. We do have a couple questions that came in. So I'm going to see here. Let's see. What does it entail to get your OSHA credentials?
Yeah, that's a good question. So OSHA is the Department of Labor, if you don't already know, occupational health safety. You can actually do it online. There's a 10 and a 30 program. And then there's a construction and general industry. I would think most of us probably want to do construction. The online course is not that expensive. You can even do it for free in person sometimes. You can find a local chapter. It's technically 10 hours worth of online content if you do it online. And it's timed, and you gotta sit there and go through it. But a lot of great stuff. And like I said earlier, this may be something it's good for insurance. It's good to get on a job site. That's the 10-hour program, and they'll actually send you a real Department of Labor OSHA 10 card. The 30 hours more of a supervisor management type. It's just OSHA 10 times 3. It's 30 hours of training, and it's way more in depth, but it's also great. I have both the 10 and 30 for construction. I also have the 10 for general industry, and I think, for the courses are usually under $200, I believe, at least for the 10-hour. So do your research on that. Highly recommend that.
Cool. I have another question. What kind of
Yeah.
costs are associated with getting started with using drones for mapping?
Yeah. So obviously there's a million ways to answer that question. There's not one trick. It's not a super simple answer, depending on your gear. I can just say, because people ask this a lot, that, if you want to buy a drone, let's say it's a Chinese drone with an RTK unit and kind of all-in package for the equipment to do photogrammetry, you're looking maybe $10,000 to $12,000. You can get creative. There's a lot of different ways to do that. If you're getting into base stations can be as much as $2,000 to $4,000 to $10,000 to $30,000. The base station that I had was pretty nice. It was probably $15,000, and it was critical to the work I was doing. Software typically per year, it's usually going to be at least $1,000 to $2,000 if you're doing, kind of depending on those platforms. But there's a lot of choices. LiDAR systems, a typical LiDAR system all in with the drone and software and the payload, now you're getting into the $40,000 up to maybe $150,000. So it all really depends. One thing about us at Multi-Copter Warehouse, we have a lot of people in the company. We've got a lot of experience that we can recommend and make multiple recommendations and help you vet that out. So please reach out to us. We're happy to kind of help out and go down that road with you.
All right, Dan, we have a pretty long question here, so I'm gonna try to break it down for you. So we have someone in the audience that their firm began looking into purchasing drones to start their UAS program this past summer. They put a hold on their current purchases pending legislation outcome. He is asking if you have any insight on what potentially would become of that if it were to pass, or if it would not.
Yeah.
Also, if it were to pass, do you think DJI will continue to sell replacement parts and batteries and so forth?
Yeah, and I'm going out online here and speaking for myself personally, not necessarily on behalf of Multi-Copter Warehouse. I did talk to someone at the FAA at this Vegas conference about it. The answer to it, unfortunately, is I don't have a great answer for that. But I will say my experience in aviation with the FAA, when it comes to the FAA and mandating something there's typically grace periods. I guess I would be safe to say that I don't think they're just going to fall out of the sky and all of our DJI stuff is going to collect dust. But, I don't think it's a great reason to hold off. However, if you look at our website and you want to reach out and talk to us, there's a lot of other options. If you don't want to go the Chinese route or overseas route, there's American companies making American drones, a lot of great options there. And just to get back to my experience, and the FAA had passed a thing for, it was called the ADS-B on aircraft. And back in the early 2000s, it was like every airplane needs to have ADS-B, and they all have it now. But if you had an older airplane or smaller plane, it was very cost prohibitive. I mean, there was instances where it was so expensive, it's like I might as well just not fly my plane into those kind of airspaces anymore, or just get rid of my plane. When that happened, they were extending it. There's exceptions, so again, you want to follow the news, but my kind of personal answer to that too is that I think that when that happens, a lot of this equipment, it has a lifespan, hopefully at least 3 to 4 years. And you may have an instance where, they're going to make exceptions. And then also, if you're not doing work that's, really big on that, you'll know up front, we work with a government deal. Well, then maybe you should just start looking at American stuff and just take that off the table. What I would not delay on is actually.
Hey, Dan.
You want to start? Yeah.
I got to interrupt you for a second. I have Scott, our president, here with us. He's going to.
That's awesome. He knows way more than I do.
You have a guest speaker, Dan.
Thank you, Scott. How are you?
Micah, if you're still, hopefully you're still listening, would be glad to address this privately as well. And Dan, I'm sorry I didn't hear all of your response, but everyone should know that none of the legislation that's being proposed at any level would be anywhere close to an all-out ban, and there is it's almost impossible that current product wouldn't be grandfathered in, and that's in a worst case situation. There's still a very strong hope that the legislation will not pass the Senate. Just because it's passed the House doesn't mean it's going to be received as well in the Senate. And it would only be for future purchases. And most of us think that it's way more likely that they'll probably increase tariffs than that they'll do a ban. But there's no scenario where existing product would be not allowed to be flown. And we have had no indication that there would be any lack of parts or availability. There would be eventually, but that would be years down the road. So there's a lot of false information out there. It's not good that it's before our Congress, but it's not as bad as it's being made out to be. So, and I'm tracking it very closely, and happy to talk with anybody individually if they ever want to. Thanks for letting me interrupt. Back to you.
Thank you, Scott. Great answer.
And I think that wraps up our questions for this webinar. If you have anything that come up that you might think of after this webinar, please feel free to reach us out or Dan directly. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone who attended this webinar, and we hope to see you in our next ones. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks.